I'll do my very, very best to answer them. That's what I'm here for. If I don't know the answers, I'll simply make it up.
Or pass over to me.
But we'll do it very convincingly. You never know, we're lying. Now, I've quickly got to get the health and safety bit out of the way. So, during the tour, could everybody please remain seated and keep their arms and legs inside the boat at all times. And I know it's really tempting on a beautiful day like today. Can everybody please try and refrain from swimming?
Yeah, so I'll be the front man. I'll take the front of this stuff.
Take off the thing. And of course, in the event of an emergency, the exits are here. The entire length that we're on today. But I've always wanted to do my Baywatch bit in slow motion off the back of the boat, so if we do start to sink, every cloud has a silver lining. Now, the first sight on the tour today is the King's Bridge. And as we pass underneath the bridge, you'll notice that it was built in two separate stages. The first stage is this middle part here, and that dates back to 1134. And that makes it the oldest road bridge that's still in use today in the whole of England. It was later widened on both sides in 1769 to accommodate the increase in traffic and pedestrian flow in Canterbury. And amazingly, up until the early 1970s, the bridge formed part of the A2, one of the busiest roads in the whole of England, carrying the main bulk of traffic between London and Dover. Then in 1970, the High Street was pedestrianised and the A2 was routed around the city centre. Now, don't worry, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And as you can see, the net doesn't do a very good job of actually keeping the pigeons out. Now, one of the first things you may notice is the relative peace and quiet from this side of the High Street. And that's because all the noise is blocked out by this large building that sits above the river and extends around the side here, and this is known as the East Bridge Hospital. And if you look up here to where the old church windows are, and that flint and stone section of building, that's an original section of the hospital that dates back to 1180, when it was founded by a man named Edward Fitz-Oswald. Whilst being known as the East Bridge Hospital, the building has never actually been used as a medical facility. Henry VIII ordered the destruction of the shrine of St Thomas so the pilgrims stopped travelling to Canterbury.
The Queen of Fairies, she got me in your green hill to dwell.
Only alleviated the flooding problem, but it also provided a base for industries such as flour mills and tanneries. And it provided a food source of fresh fish, and it also provided some drinking water. However, as you can imagine, the drinking water was often very, very polluted. But nowadays, the river's nice and clean, and that's because it's protected by the National River Authority. They put lots of restrictions on the river to keep it nice and clean. An example of this is motorised boats that are allowed on the river, which is unfortunate for James. Now, don't worry too much about this pipe that sticks out from the building here. I'm told that they very rarely flush their toilets inside there. And of course, nowadays, lots of fresh fish in the river, including brown trout, some migratory sea trout, dace, bream, roach, eels, and of course the monster of the deep, pike.
Let us cross, they must So gloomy, gloomy was the night, and eerie was the way.
Grey was the cheapest colour of fabric available to buy at the time, and they travelled across Europe at the beginning of the 13th century, surviving on donations from rich kings and nobles. And when they arrived in Canterbury in 1224, they were seeking some land to settle on. But unfortunately, the king at the time, King Henry III, wasn't a man known for his generosity. They said he had bulging pockets full up with money, but he had very short arms. However, eventually, after some heavy negotiations, he allowed them this small island, it's about an acre in size, and they settled here and built a number of buildings. Now, unfortunately for the Greyfriars, they were later evicted from this land, and their buildings were destroyed under the orders of another King Henry, King Henry VIII, during the Reformation. And thankfully, one building survived from this period. And if we look along the river here, right at the very end, you can make out a small chapel that's actually built over the riverbed. And this dates back to the 13th century, to around 1268, and it only survived the Reformation because it's actually built on top of the only bridge that led to the island back in those days. Into gold, with no success, I may add. Now this tower looks very old and medieval, but in fact it's what's known as a Victorian folly, meaning a trick or a joke, because it's just made out of brick with cement rendered over it to give it that medieval look. And it was built by a very crafty businessman, and he realised that Victorian people were very curious about alchemists. And if he built a tower like this, it would attract lots of people into the city centre, where of course they would spend their money on food, accommodation and perhaps the occasional river tour. So they were very happy with their money, and they set about building a number of priories in the surrounding area, totaling around about 11 different buildings. Now unfortunately, these are the only two buildings that survived the test of time, as all the others, just for a surprise, were destroyed under the orders of Henry VIII during the Reformation. And he only allowed these two buildings to survive because they were suitable buildings for him to use as barracks for his troops that were stationed in Canterbury. And over the years, these buildings have been used for many different reasons. Nowadays, this building on my left-hand side is owned by the King's Schools, the oldest school in the whole of England, probably the most expensive. All their efforts are
I am silver and full of flesh. I'm fit to be myself. This night is Halloween, Janet. When fairy folk ran bright,
If you lived in one of these houses, it was virtually in your back garden, festering away, so you couldn't get away from the smell. And you also had to put up with the horrendous noise the mill would have made, virtually 24 hours a day. So it wasn't a very nice place to live. Now, after the flour mill burnt down,